Today I'm going to be presenting my findings on Thomas Malthus, who was considered to be the father of demography. Malthus was an English economist who was born on February 13, 1766 in England and died on December 29, 1834. Malthus earned his Master of Arts degree in 1791 at Cambridge University. In 1805, he became a professor of history and political economy at the East India Company's College. In 1819, Malthus was elected a Fellow of the Royal Society, and in 1821, he joined the Political Economy Club. Here's some context about his time period. Around the time Malthus was writing, disease was becoming less dangerous to human populations. And as for starvation, well, we've argued in the past that starvation is generally a man-made problem, but to Malthus, it was still a natural disaster. He thought that uncontrolled reproduction was a central problem at that time. And to add on, Britain was in the midst of the Industrial Revolution, which was also a period of which workers would quit their jobs on the farms. And citizens were in an effort to survive on minimum wage and to keep crops growing. One of Malthus's major theory was called the cycle of misery. He explained this through math. Humans could reproduce geometrically, capable of doubling population every 25 years, but land on Earth is finite, meaning there's limitations, boundaries, essentially saying we will run out of land eventually, and from this, people will die. Humans would continue to live their desperate lives as increasing the demand by raising prices of goods, such as food, clothing, medicine, you name it. While powerful individuals and nations would seize the assets of the weak, but even some of the strong would fall victim to hunger and disease. Inevitably, the population would then dip low enough for the land to recover, giving another generation a chance to repeat the same mistakes. Over time then, human population would remain roughly constant with the natural fertility of the land. And so again, Malthus called this theory of history the cycle of misery. Thomas Robert Malthus was commonly known for the population growth philosophies outlined in his 1798 book, An Essay on the Principle of Population. This essay is one of the most influential pieces of writing in history, along with a handful of other works. It established the methods and importance of the modern field of economics, and displayed his theory on how population affects food production or vice versa. This is how Malthus advanced economic thought. Population growth will always tend to outrun the food supply, and that betterment of humankind is impossible without stern limits on reproduction. This thinking is commonly referred to as Malthusianism. Malthusian theory played a devastating role in the Irish potato famine in 1846 to 1851, which I will briefly touch on. Nearly 1 million Irish people died of starvation, disease, and violence during the famine. In the century before 1846, Ireland's population had grown significantly, and many English thinkers saw the famine as an outcome of Malthus's predictions. From this point of view, providing food or aid to the Irish was futile. It would only delay the cycle of misery until its downward swings down even more people. The only remedy for the starving was for them to die. By 1852, immigration and starvation had shrunk the population of Ireland from about 6.5 million to 4 million. In 2010, the island's population was still lower than at the famine's start. Even as Malthus was writing, the curve of human population growth was beginning to slope upward. The increase in population was so gradual that all Malthus noticed of it were the outliers, the poor clinging to life. The growth in population was far more permanent than Malthus ever imagined. It was unstoppable. From 1750 to 1850, right when Malthus was alive, the number of humans on Earth grew by 500 million people, from 800 million to 1.3 billion. By 1960, the population reached 3 billion, and since then, the world has added 1 billion humans roughly every 15 years. Malthus was writing that it was impossible, but the human population was accelerating at a high rate. Malthus should have looked past prominent disasters like the potato famine and recognized that two major revolutions in food production were occurring while he was alive. He wasn't paying attention to other countries like China. For example, the Chinese farmers used a number of inventions in agriculture, and also agriculture was also changing in Europe during Malthus's lifetime. Malthus considered population and food production as two self-evident premises. He said the first was that food was a priority to sustain human life, and the second premise is that human sexual instinct is constant. And based on these very two premises, this is where he came up with an argument that population grew at a geometric rate, while food output grew at the arithmetic rate, and that food scarcity was therefore inevitable. In other words, nature imposes firm limits on our pursuit of a higher standard of living. At this rate, our population would double every 25 years, and this can be called the doubling effect, where the population grows in what statisticians call a geometric progression. He admitted that there were two types of population control that existed. However, he did not think they would prove strong enough to check the geometric progression of our world's population. First, there was positive checks, factors in which increased mortality rates, which include war, famine, disease, epidemics. The graph on the right showcases population exceeding food supply and is kept in check by a positive check like famine or disease. Then, the population will drop below the food supply. As it recovers, the cycle will continue. Then, there were preventative checks, also known as negative checks. Factors in which reduce fertility rates, for example, moral restraints such as later marriage or sexual abstinence. The graph on the right showcases population beginning to approach the limits of the supply of resources, as shown on the blue line. Then growth slows due to preventative checks. In all, Malthus is simply trying to illustrate to his readers the unequal powers of growth in population and food production. To connect everything I've said to the 21st century, I will be discussing how Malthus's theories connect to current economic issues in our world. We live on one planet that has a certain amount of arable land, and surely at some point, us humans will suck up all of the resources, and this is especially true in the age of global climate change. In 2014, the UN Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change issued a report that warned of the potential for warmer temperatures to restrict food supplies in the face of a growing demand. In fact, it claimed that rising temperatures had already diminished reproduction by 2% per decade, while demand for food was rising at 14% over the same period. Food prices, which had been declining steadily until 2007, where prices have been rapidly increasing ever since. To add on, Malthus certainly underestimated how successful we would be adapting to environmental constraints, and he underestimated the role that technology and innovation could play in creating a world where more humans could live. Malthus did not account that in the near future or in present tense that there will be possible technological or cultural changes. Changes in agriculture helps keep up with the increase in demand due to the growing population. It is also evident that Malthus's theory applies to our current situation of the pandemic we are situated in. Malthus argued that an exponential growing population will self-correct through war, famine, and disease, and so the pandemic is the effect of his population theory. In this situation, the virus is a positive check, consequently reducing the population in numbers and hindering economic growth. To end my presentation off, I have a significant quote I want to share with you. The power of population is indefinitely greater than the power in the earth to produce substance for man. This quote basically sums up and correlates everything I mentioned in my presentation and about Malthus's population theory. And this is my works cited, and that concludes the end of my presentation. Thank you for listening.